Hey guys, it is Monday, March 24th. We are on our next installment of these little continuing the conversations things from our Sunday teachings together. And just so today we're just going to recap. Also, I guess I'm going to address the difference in appearance of this conversation continuing thing. I opted to try not doing slides, and I know sometimes graphics help. But that takes a lot more time, and I figured, let's see if this works, because I have heard from some of you saying that you love when these are out early in the morning, which today it's not, so I'm sorry about that, but you love when it's out because you can just listen to them on the way to work or something like that. So if this works just the same, I am totally on board for just doing audio, but if there's a big no, I absolutely need graphics or need to see what you're saying or anything like that, let me know and I will see what I can do for you on that. But as a recap, this past Sunday we finally got moving a little bit into the actual wilderness part of our text, with Jesus encountering the tempter and having his very first temptation, the temptation to turn stone into bread. Rather, I should say stones into bread, plural, like multiple. And so what we saw, though, is that this happens right after Jesus comes out of being affirmed through his baptism and is affirmed by the Father in his identity. This is my Son whom I love. With him I'm well pleased. I enjoy being with him. He's a pleasure to be with. I'm excited about who he is, where he's going, what he's doing, all of the above. And then he's led by the Spirit into the wilderness, and he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights, and then he encounters the devil. In the Hebrew, it's called this Matthew's not written in Hebrew, so don't get that idea. But just as a comparison and connecting more to the Old Testament, the Satan, or the accuser, the tempter, all of those are phrasings or titles or names that you can associate with this temptation experience of Jesus. And so, I also really love how Matthew just says, frankly, just point blank, he didn't eat anything for 40 days, 40 nights, and then he was very hungry. There's something kind of cool about Matthew emphasizing the humanity of Jesus there. But one of the things we specifically leaned into a little bit, especially for our time of going through this series Beyond the Wilderness, walking in step with the Spirit through the wilderness of whatever that might look like for you right now in your life, and moving beyond that to where God is leading you to. We talked a little bit about specifically the conditions around that. I don't know necessarily if we think about, when the tempter starts to tempt Jesus, he says, if you're really the Son of God, then tell these stones to become bread. And the very assumption, I don't know, I can hear this a number of ways. Number one, I could hear, and I said this in the teaching video, so I'm not going to go back all the way, so feel free to go back and listen to that or watch that on YouTube, whatever. But I can hear it as listen, Jesus, this is beneath you. You are the Son of God. If you're the Son of God, then this should not be. You should not be hungry right now. Just make these bread and be done with this. You deserve better than that. I can also hear, are you really the Son of God? Because you're not even turning these to bread, and you totally should be if you're the Son of God, kind of thing. So there's one of almost like an affirmation of his identity in a sense, but also kind of a sneaky, manipulative, I'm gonna get you to remove your focus on God as provider, with the logical reasoning that you are the Son of God and you shouldn't be hungry. You deserve to be full, and then you have the other side of it that's an accusation and a direct attack against the very identity that is there. So either way, I don't know necessarily if you can 100% say one way or the other, and I'm not saying those are the only two ways, but it's interesting to me that is what the tempter does with Jesus. And Jesus' response comes all the way back from Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3, but I read verses 1 through 3 just for a little bit more of the context. But I really, 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 I've been spending a lot of time personally in Deuteronomy, and I really think this book in and of itself is greatly neglected, for one, but two, I really think there's a lot that we can learn, especially as we talk about moving through the wilderness by spending some dedicated and intensive time in the book of Deuteronomy. I'm not going to read it here. I'm not going to go back and all that, but I really encourage you to go back and check that out. But Jesus quotes from Deuteronomy 8, verse 3, and it's when Moses is recapping and reflecting on the time in the wilderness with the Israelites, and he says, this is what God tried to get you to understand and to learn, that man does not live on bread alone, but by the words that come from the mouth of God. And I went a little bit into Hebrew there, that it's not a devar for word, matter, or thing. It's a motzah, something like that. And it means something springing forth. And I really am drawn to that because, there's so much more than just physical sustenance that God provides. And so by just saying, give me bread, or just fixating on one thing, can be accurate, but it also can be a little bit restrictive in terms of really understanding and appreciating and being grateful for and surrendering to God, because so many things spring forth from him. He is the source of everything good. And so Jesus quotes from this direct conversation that Moses is having with the people. And I really, really am drawn to that because, and this is kind of how I'll end today a little bit. Frankly, if you want to memorize a verse, I think you should memorize Deuteronomy 8:3, that portion, or you can just memorize Matthew 4:4. Matthew 4:4 is Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." I would encourage you to commit that to memory, and here's why. I was told that the questions were kind of difficult, so sorry. So let me rephrase one of them, and if you answered it, cool, think about it again. And if you didn't answer it, then here's your chance to. Where do we settle for bread? Where do we settle for bread when there's something else God's wanting to give? There's one way you could ask that. But the concept of man does not live on bread alone does not mean that you do not eat. So don't go to that extreme. I think as Westerners, we tend to want to go to the extreme, and that's not what he's doing. That's not what Moses was talking about. Man does not live on bread alone. So there's something there, like there's a recognition that, yes, there is a physical sustenance component that absolutely needs addressed. But the second part of that, but on every word or everything that comes from the mouth of God. I think that there's that connection there of like bread and sustenance comes from the mouth of God, but so much more does too. So where are you focused on just surviving when maybe God's saying, no, I call you to life, like we talked about last week, life to the full. So not just surviving, but thriving, new life. Everlasting life begins now. It's not something that happens after your physical body dies. That's very Greek philosophically, like philosophy. Greek philosophy, it's very philosophical from like Plato, very Platonic thought and not Hebrew thought. Where like Platonic, honestly, I think leans into a little bit like of early Gnosticism at the early church, like when the disciple John was writing his gospel and some of his letters, like he's fighting against a lot of this heresy that's coming up through this thing called Gnosticism. And one of their big things was that the physical reality was evil, so we were longing for death so we can escape the physical realm. And a lot of that, honestly, in practical speaking, has infiltrated, I think, a lot of our theology that the Western Church talks about. I'm not saying all, because there's a good chunk that does not. But, I mean, if you just go to a random church out in the country, and I'm not stereotyping, although it sounds like I am, it's just been, for the most part, when I've gone to a church that seems isolated and not actually practicing kingdom community, where churches across denominational lines seek the unity that Jesus talks about in John chapter 17, you start to drift away and you start to do some really funky things. But one of the biggest things that's carried on from like Plato's philosophy and thinking is that there's a separation between body and spirit, and the spirit goes on in the body, and like we just kind of float around in heaven when we die, and that's heaven. And Jesus and all the New Testament, and even in the Old Testament, if you don't know your Old Testament, then you wouldn't know this, but there's a resurrection, you know that, or at least I hope you do, and then there's a unification of the heavens and the earth to become, as the New Testament clarifies, as the new heavens and new earth. God comes to dwell with his people. Not that we... Yeah, I'll just leave that there. I'm getting off on all kinds of stuff. But all that to say, man does not live on... Let's go back to that. Man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. I want you to think about, where do you settle for maybe what God's wanting to give you more? Because I think when we settle, we tend to say, my kids do it all the time. If I'm helping them with something and they think they got it, they say, okay, I got it, and they shut me out. And frankly, adults do it too. Like, oh, okay, I got it, and I'm going on. And you take off, whether or not you have it or not, you think you do. So you shut off the source of information, or shut off the source of help. And I think that's a exact a parallel, I think, to this. Like, we're settling for bread, but God has so much more, and there's so much more to life than just surviving. There's thriving, and that's what Jesus comes to have us join him, take his yoke upon ourselves, and walk with his Spirit in what he's doing. So, all that to say, think about that question. If you want to go back and look at the questions, yes, again, I was told that they were challenging, so hopefully this week we can make some easier connections and continue the conversation that way. And I hope to be with you guys again tomorrow, and until then, take care.